A heartbreaking work of staggering genius. Took me a while to get that title right. Committed to memory, but it is a 2000 work of autobiographical slash memoir by Dave Eggars. This is my first by Eggars, and a note on the memoir slash autobiographical narrative style. The foreword, although the way that I was listening to the audiobook, they actually had the foreword at the end of the book, so I didn't really know. I don't know why exactly they did that, if that was just a flub or. But either way, it didn't really do anything bad for me at all. Usually I try not to read certain forewords, especially because like they tend to kind of spoil some of the books too. Like I believe Brothers Karamazov, I think like the foreword I had actually had a pretty overt kind of explicit spoiler in there. It was just like telling me like right off the bat like about the murderers and everything like that. I'm just like, dang it. But anyway, so yeah, Dave Eggers, yeah, he said that don't think of it as an autobiography. Don't if you don't like memoirs, if you don't like non-fictional accounts of the author's own real life events, then don't think of it as that. Just think of it as a, and he's very tongue-in-cheek the way he says it, and like the way he kind of goes through the whole thing, not with a kind of postmodern, even though it's kind of pretty postmodern. There's a sense of like him and David Foster Wallace, the way they recount things, and the way they talk about things. They try to like caution a lot of what they say with a lot of like, hey, now I know this is gonna sound douchey. I know this is gonna sound like I'm going off on a tangent around. I know I'm referencing myself, and I know it's very stupid. There's a lot of points in the memoir that sound like that, and that that's happening. And I think he was also saying that like the amount of stuff that happened to him sounded so were so kind of weirdly serendipitous and fortuitous that he had no choice but to call it, that they almost sound like they could be fictional. But at the same time, he was saying that I couldn't have made this stuff up. It's that weird. But yeah, so Dave Eggers comes from very peculiar backgrounds. I knew of him. This is not too long ago, but I want to say I probably knew about him via Wallace, Infinite Jest, the foreword he wrote. I believe the 10th anniversary, so that would have been 2006. And when I first read it, Infinite Jest, I saw his thing there, and I was like, oh, who's this? And I did like a little bit of cursory research, and I was like, I didn't know that about his parents and like the way much about how he was raised or anything. I just knew about McSweeney's and the fact that his publishing company had an interesting kind of way of doing things, like how they release certain things. And he was on Charlie Rose. I watched an interview, and he did little illustrations, because I think he originally wanted to become an artist, like a painter, I believe, and he tried pretty hard since he was pretty young to become one, but ended up deciding against it, and then his interest kind of verged over to writing. So McSweeney's has a pretty unique style of hosting other people's art stuff that might not be able to get published by the mainstream kind of publishing, like contracts or book deals and stuff like that. So like they basically have like a little outlet for these people, and that's I think that's a nice thing. I've heard good things about them. So yeah, he talks about, this is pre that, and he talks about when he turned 21 or 22, both his parents passed on, and tragic enough, obviously they both of them, his mother, I believe, passed away first, and within 6 months of each other, I think they both due cancer. I believe she passed away due to breast cancer, and I believe his father passed away to another, I think, lung cancer, I believe. Although he was said to not have been, his father was said to be healthy and not really show any signs of smoking or anything that would kind of cause or bring about that kind of variety of cancer. But at the same time, I think there was other things that might have been kind of coming up. I think that like something that contributed to his death, I think, and it was just so like unfortunately to happen that that close apart. And so what happens is like he starts to take over and starts to become a legal guardian to his younger brother Toph, which is short for Christopher. I don't think I've ever heard that kind of shortening that kind of nickname of of Christopher. Usually it's Chris. That's kind of this. I think, but I like that kind of interesting kind of nickname for someone. Toph. And it just occurred to me, Topher Grace. Yeah, that's another person. So yeah, you kind of it does have a kind of memorable ring to it, I guess. But yeah, he takes care of his younger brother, and there's a pretty wide age gap. Although according to an interview, I think he said his sister was actually that there's his I think his sister Beth and two sisters, and I think he had one brother. I might be mixing that up, or he might have had another brother. I think I might be mixing up two brothers and two sisters, maybe. I'm sorry, or three brothers rather. But yeah, this is I come from a large family of four sisters and two brothers, so, or me and my brother, one brother. So yeah, so it's like I should kind of know this, but yeah. Anyway, so there's he takes the but since he's a lot older than his brother Toph, he is 6 or 7, I believe, when he takes over charge, and they begin to go down this the vicissitudes of life together. And he's like, basically in many ways he's like. This is why it's kind of confusing because like you're of two minds to think about like what he's experiencing and like how he's taking in this all this in, because on one hand he feels you get like kind of the inner thoughts of like what's going on exactly when he takes over his brother, and he's looking out for him, and he's one part of him is begrudging, like he's like, darn it, why do I have to do this, this is horrible, like I didn't ask for this to happen, or I'm not his exact words, obviously, not doing it justice, but he's like part of him is kind of a little bit bitter. He's like not necessarily, he doesn't obviously doesn't hate his brother whatsoever, but like there are times when his brother will call him out for certain things, and then his prideful aspect will come out. Like the whole thing that happened with Adam Rich too. The 8 is Enough, I believe the name of the show was. It was kind of almost a bit of a Full House kind of family drama that was pretty famous in the '90s. And Dave Eggars, which I think he was on Conan O'Brien, I think was saying that he had a fake he wanted to make a kind of fake death of Adam Rich to be able to basically exploit and show how the media, in his eyes, of how what people at his magazine called Might magazine that they had, and that they were trying to release a story to kind of as a kind of parody of tabloid things, and how people pretend to be all weepy and and grieving over some essentially a stranger's death, and that he's basically trying to kind of satirize that. There's a satirical element to the book and the stuff, and the stunts he pulls and stuff, and they always feel like something that's almost out of bounds, like, okay, that's maybe, because then you start thinking, okay, well, if his parents think he's dead, like, how horrified do you think, I don't know if that was like the agreement or part of the contract, but, I mean, he did agree to it, but, like, there is this thing where his younger brother, Toph, was pointing out all the flaws and, like, how they're just doing this because he's jealous of Adam Rich, and he's jealous of the fame that he got, like, like he was, like he was, hanging out with the Brooke Shields, like when he was at, 8 or 9, and you're just, like envious of his career, like where he's gone, and that now that Adam Rich is kind of, I dare say, like, he had a tragic life in himself. Adam Rich actually, I believe, passed away semi recently, a couple years ago, due to a fentanyl overdose. So yeah, that's obviously harrowing in it of itself, like his addictions and all that. But his career was it was a fading star, and like that's kind of the sad truth of a lot of child actors. But that, I guess, they wanted to kind of point out the hypocrisy, I guess, the double standards, I guess, of Hollywood. Double-mindedness is probably better. Duplicitous kind of behavior of holier than thou of like Hollywood and tabloids and entertainment news and all that, which I definitely share I hope a healthy dose of bile for, but at the same time, there's some of his stuff did seem a little bit misguided. So yeah, Dave Eggers takes over. He's with his brother, and one part of him, like I said, he was a little bit bitter about the whole thing, but another side of him, he was like, like this 8-year-old kid here is now going to be my own laboratory. He jokes at one point. He says that, yeah, I'm going to be able to fill him in with like, just the right music that I like, the kind of movies I like, the sports I like. He's going to be the exact, like, this kind of like Frankenstein like laboratory of ideas and kind of at my behest. So I thought that was funny, like the way, like, because I've never had a little brother. I had a little sister, but she was like just kind of year younger than me, but you know, like there wasn't, I didn't really have much room for that, but I did have an older brother myself, so 5 year difference. But yeah, he is, you know, like kind of, I there wasn't quite that kind of, obviously, because you know my father and you know my mother kind of you know took over, but I just kind of wondered what that would be like if my older brother was kept and that kind of thing, because my I think in interviews Eggers says that all his other siblings were kind of already had their own families, were spoken for, and all their time was kind of used up. So he was, you know, basically looking, you know, he had no other option. But at the same time, he didn't, you know, he was, you know, another side of him was like, you know, like your little brother is also kind of somebody you can kind of confide with, and it's like a comforting kind of thing because it's like you can just entirely be yourself with, you know, like the same jokes and humor and all that. So yeah, that's kind of a, you know, like the upsides of it. You know, it's not so dreary sometimes. Like, you know, they did struggle. He does talk about his parents kind of, you know, having a Catholic guilt and, you know, like the way they, you know, kind of held sacrosanct to the body and stuff like that. And I grew up kind of a similar, maybe similar thing. It was a weird kind of schism between my dad, who was a pretty devout Catholic through his life, and then my mother was more of a kind of a relaxed evangelical Christian, but she was more, yeah, more kind of culturally open-minded. But maybe my dad was too. My dad was, you know, pretty open-minded with like books and arts, and he was pretty artistic and had. But my mom was more open-minded and probably more like letting us watch Monty Python and stuff pretty young. So that kind of opened our heads up a little bit. But then there was also kind of the so I feel like certain things, certain ideas, like certain things that I might have grown up being offensive had I been so prudish, I guess, and I guess that kind of, you know, I still have signs of maybe certain prudishness towards certain things where I, you know, hold in kind of low esteem or just like, you know, shock. But like at the same time, I'm trying to. It is a kind of, you know, kind of a blessing in disguise to have stumbled upon some things by accident. You know, like certain things like. I don't know if I mentioned this on the on photography thing with Susan Sontag on how I actually stumbled upon a Diana Arbus photo when I was quite young, and I didn't know it was her, obviously. You know, I don't think you really know these things when you're 9, 10, or maybe 11, but yeah, it was something about that she did, and it was the nudist colony portrait that she did, and it's just like this, it was something I saw kind of in passing in a book, I think it was called Century, I think. It was a tome thing that my friend's mother got for, kind of got for the, because my sister was, I think, got a coffee shop at that point, but it was something that you wouldn't want to actually put in a coffee table, even though it is a coffee table book. But it was something so, you know, there's so many graphic things in it. It was interspersed, but it was just basically one photo for every year, I think. Or it was maybe a handful of photos. I think it was maybe 10 photos for every year or something like that. It's like very iconic kind of photos. And for the 60s, I think it was Arbus had, you know, her kind of column of stuff, and it was basically, yeah. But yeah, it was something that it didn't like haunt me so much, but it was something that, well, I'm kind of glad in hindsight that happened, that it was like kind of not closed off so much so to the point where I'm like, oh, well, if I saw that when I was 18 rather than 8, I would just be like kind of off my rocker. So certain things, not to say I'm perfect or anything, I'm obviously not. But yeah, there's some things that I related to, and certain things like the narrative voice. It's kind of hard to pick up where things are going. Like it's hard to, maybe it's just because it's been a while since I've read straight memoirs, especially memoirs in it through a postmodern kind of lens of, you know, like, you know, removing and, you know, kind of detached away and being like, this is me, you know, how pretentious of me, how, you know, for narrating my own story and all that, and kind of removing itself. So it was kind of hard for me personally. I don't know if this really constitutes a critique, but it is, for what it's worth, it was difficult for me to parse where things ended and where they began. Where, like, he was going, like, okay, so he's, you know, early 20s, and then it goes all the way till about present day of when he's 30, when he released in 1999 about. So he goes from about then 22 to like 29 years old, give or take, and he's, you know, he's interested in kind of journalism, and he moves, like, he's an interesting thing because, like, he's born in Boston, and his, you know, his mother kind of has a Boston-laden kind of accent, and is like, you know, like, she says one of the things, like, the kind of motifs of the book, I guess, is a humorous little kind of saying that they all kind of say is like, don't be such a martyr, like don't be such a martyr, like meaning martyr, like don't be such a, when somebody in anybody in their family was being dramatic, they'd say that, like don't be such a martyr. So that was kind of an interesting thing, like a kind of play on words. And yeah, so there'd be moments where like it'd be like really, like really kind of like soft hearted, kind of like looks back and like kind of looking back and a resurgence of memories and all that, and there would be that would kind of come up, and there would be a dramatic kind of undertone, and then it would kind of switch to kind of like going back, and then there would be like kind of a weird tonally not inconsistent, but just kind of weird thing where he would be like auditioning for Real World, MTV Real World, and he was like, "Why don't you just have me on Real World? I'll talk about how I'm looking after my, my little boy, my little brother, and how he's like basically, my kind of how it's like such a throbbing story, and like you guys are gonna love us." And he was just like all very tongue in cheek, very kind of in that classic fashion of the book, like he's like kind of trying to vie for the producers and them, but also in a way of being like, but if you don't want us, fine, whatever, I don't need you guys. It's like kind of two minds of that kind of an interesting kind of 90s thing of that sincerity of like being sincere in your own double mind of your own kind of contradictory nature of your own fractured kind of, we all have, and being kind of sincere about that kind of thing of like, I do want this, but I also, I want this, but I'm going to pretend like I don't want it. And, we all have kind of ways that we kind of play, or kind of little machinations of kind of behavior in order to kind of appeal to people and kind of make people like us, because we're human, obviously. So I'm not saying I'm immune from that, but it's like it is definitely a kind of a very kind of interesting kind of thing that it's like the 90s, I think, was like a kind of interesting kind of thing of being hip, and you're in San Francisco, you're in the hub and the hotbed of entertainment, and he both kind of like, I think Eggars basically, and fictionalized, semi-fictionalized maybe, that kind of aspect of it, like, is basically likes it, but also is like wants the attention, like is kind of wants attention, but as soon as he gets it, he's like, darn it, what do I want? Why I don't want this? So it's like kind of an interesting thing that I think any kind of person who wants, like we want a bit of fame, like we want a bit of something just to get like a little bit of art, just to get some traction, to get ourselves out there, so people, exposures, like, just so we can connections and with the right people, and then like the next second it happens, it's like we're like we retract from ourselves, and we're like, wait a second, I didn't want that. Like, this is like, now I have endless media presence, and now I have to do these press tours, and now I have to do all these book conference things, and that's why, like, David Foster Wallace had a similar thing of like, both critiquing and being on the outside and saying something pretty funny, like, our local writer might be as famous as the most famous writer might be as well known and recognizable as your local weatherman. So an interesting kind of thing where he could kind of be on the outside and to be an ogler, like he said in that one essay, I think it was E Pluribus Unum, I believe, where he's talking about writers being oglers, and kind of the offbeat, strange, peculiar people on the subway that kind of look at you kind of weary-eyed, and like that kind of behavior is kind of a little bit kind of off-putting almost. But yeah, this kind of thing where writers have that kind of ability to kind of like recede into the background and be like, yeah, I'm not. Yeah, even like it is hard to find a kind of face recognition in the same way that you find of any kind of actress or actor or anybody like that. Namely for the sake of like the contents of what people put out there is namely, conceptual, and it's abstract and arcane sometimes. It's not material. It's like it takes a while to digest and kind of foment or fumigate on. So yeah, that is there was another point where I liked where he was talking about getting like certain things like kidney stones and like that, like God to help, or like God, thank God I haven't had anything like that, but like something like that where kidney stones are like kind of he said like the worst pain, and he started like worrying whether he might have AIDS, and like kind of the AIDS crisis thing. It's like he started like regretting all the times he like kind of was too maybe too like careless or whatever in the way he kind of treated women, and he's like kind of now he's like it's like all those things that come up in your mind when something horribly painful is happening, like kidney stones. But yeah, he was. I like that kind of that way of kind of bouncing back and forth with a narrative and being like, but at the same time, it was hard to figure out like, okay, so now we're here chronologically, and it's like, but at the same time, there's also flashbacks, kind of intermittent that kind of fit the style. He talked about his it was his older sister, I think Beth was her name, and that they try to kind of work together and things, and like she was like always the one that was like able to kind of hold on to the details and the wills, and like the main thing too is like they're like all leading up to, spoiler alert, trying to get hold of his mother's ashes, because when they died, both his parents ended up donating their bodies for the good of science. And he like imagines all like the worst kind of visualizing on like what might happen, and like he talks about like there being like a possibility that they might have been like crazy lab scientists might have put them in their laboratory, like, and like we're like still like making stew out of their soul or something, but something like it just kind of just kind of entertaining kind of scenarios. But yeah, these talks about like trying to get a hold of it, and like finally is able to, through the help of his sister, like she was like a lot better at kind of like managing the detail kind of fact kind of oriented, and like trying to keep, and then him feeling kind of a guilt over that, and having the ashes and not really knowing what to do with the ashes once he got them. And he was like, I already drove up to, I think he said, from San Francisco, from I think from California all the way up to Illinois, Chicago, I think was where he was raised, I believe, and so that's where he was trying to put like he was trying to think about spreading the ashes on the Great Lake, and like the and like when that when he finally got them, like he was thinking like, okay, what am I gonna do? Put these on the plane back home and like just kind of hold on to them and like and have people kind of weirded out by it, or am I gonna just kind of just to get over the fact that there's no perfect moment for these things. And like it was an interesting kind of relatable moment, because I feel like the whole thing of like spreading the ashes, which I've never done, because my dad, he was he was given a he was buried, just like but yeah, he basically, I think he talks about like how the ashes were flying around, and kind of in the same thing that happened like the end of The Big Lebowski, I think, with yeah, Steve Buscemi's character, yeah, that was awful, but it's funny though, just I guess to put some better light on it. But anyway, but yeah, this is pretty interesting book, I think. It seemed like it was like up and it was like somebody described it as like a kind of a manic depressive kind of episode of of like a stream of conscious kind of out there. Some of it reminded me a bit of On the Road, Jack Kerouac, with like that kind of stream of conscious, like, yes, and then this happened, like we're going to Mexico now, and like we will go past these great hills, and we will be like candles, like ever burning out, like Roman candles, like those of us aren't the ones that are the most interesting aren't like the square ones back at home, like following the laws and working their regular jobs, but they're the ones that burn bright like Roman candles. Something like that, I think. But yeah, that kind of just like we're all here, we're all passionate, we're all young people trying to start this magazine, that Might magazine. That was like it's kind of interesting. It was, I wish that kind of creative fervor was like kind of back, that there seemed to be in the '90s, not to kind of appeal to the old way at all, but because there has to be something. It's like whether it's has to be somewhere, I'm sure, but it's not, surely not near where I am, but something like that kind of ardor and like passion, and like even if it's misspent or like misguided, I think that's still a good thing, because that, I think, the new sincerity is I think is a good movement. I think like that's what Eggars is a part of. So yeah, it's definitely got my attention. I definitely think there was, like certain things about, he doesn't paint himself in the best light. He doesn't like always say, yeah, and I'm a perfect guy and I watched out for my brother. But like when he does that, it's always tongue in cheek and always like kind of like kind of undercutting the kind of power, but like the parts, I think he's undersells himself in the sense that seems like a pretty good guy all around for, like noble deed of taking care of his brother and, looking out for him when he didn't have to. He could have just been like, and then always like making sure like he, fed him right and gave him the right food and make sure like he never got into drugs or anything like that. And that's a noble deed. But then on the other hand, he's, he kind of paints himself in certain light. He's pretty open about the embarrassing situations and the things he did, like the Adam Rich kind of thing, and feeling horrible about certain things that he did, or just certain behaviors that he had, or trying to woo certain women. Like I think like the one character of the sexologist, I thought that was kind of like a kind of almost Woody Allen kind of incident that or maybe not incident, but just kind of a flib, or kind of a just a kind of misguided attempt at trying to, but I thought that was like that. Those kind of incidents were painted in there just to kind of put a complex portrait of himself, I guess, as honest, I guess, as it could. But he was saying that a lot of this stuff, he said that it was fiction, but like at the same time he could have, he edited things to be that could just have easily, like he talked about things that happened. I think he said that there were things that happened on a certain date that he might have moved up just to kind of like co-align with certain other things, but like aside from that, everything else was kind of pretty true to his own life. So yeah, that is all I have for Dave Eggars, a heartbreaking work of a staggering genius. And yeah, let me know what you think. And as always, I don't usually say this or include it because I think it's kind of like, it's second, like basically, it's basically kind of self-evident, but, if you want to subscribe, go ahead and do so. Like, subscribe, all that. Let me know what you think about this book in the comments if you've read it. And yeah, thanks for watching. Actually, recording all the way there. Nice.